Good morning, everyone. Welcome to QM Environmental's Emergency Management and our integrated approach to managing emergencies. So today's webinar is scheduled for about an hour. We should be done our presentation in about 45 minutes, which will lead about 50 minutes again for questions and answers. So any questions you do have, just put them in the chat at the top of the screen and we'll get to them at the very end of the presentation. So our speakers today, so myself, I've been in the emergency management and environmental response industry for about 10 years now. I'm active POC training captain of the City of Chilliwack Fire Department, and I've directly managed 1,000 small to large size spills, road, rail, marine incidents across Canada. Next, we have Suzanne Bernier, who is a former journalist, award-winning global crisis management consultant, speaker, and author. She was named 2016's Continuity and Resilience Consultant of the Year, and she had the honor of being a guest speaker at the White House during FEMA's 2016 Emergency Preparedness Award ceremony. So our agenda for today, just a little bit about QM Environmental, some pillars of emergency management, 2 case studies, one of which is a roadside incident, the other one is a global pandemic, H1N1 in the workplace. From there, again, we'll have questions and answers at the very end of the presentation, so just feel free to type in the chat and we'll make sure we'll get to all of them at the end of the presentations. So QM Environmental, we are a leading environmental industrial services company with offices and qualified teams strategically located across Canada. QM provides end-to-end capabilities to the industries and customers we serve. With over 35 years experience, our service portfolio includes demolition, environmental remediation, hazardous materials abatement, waste management, emergency management, and environmental response services. Through QM's integrated approach, we can provide a full service turnkey solution for all of our clients and internal project needs within all of our divisions. We thrive to be the one-stop shop where clients can come with any environmental problems, and from there, any of our defined groups can support their needs. With a full level of synergy between all of our lines of businesses and the ability to share resources for any special projects, we are resilient in this industry. Next, you'll see the 4 pillars of emergency management. We thrive at QM. So we use the 4 pillars of emergency management for all of our clients and major projects. We've taken the time to proactively mitigate a hazardous event from occurring, preparing our clients to ensure that individuals, communities, and organizations are ready to undertake any form of emergency response, business continuity, or recovery. We know that response stage we can manage the consequences, including limiting loss of life, minimizing suffering, minimize the effects to the environment, and reduce personal injury or property damage. This allows us to have a smooth transition to recovery where the steps and processes are implemented to repair communities or anything affected negatively by an emergency event to get everything restored back to acceptable conditions. So our first case study today will be led by me. So in October 2018, BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy made it mandatory for any regulated person carrying greater than 10,000 liters or more of fuel to have a current, up-to-date BC spill contingency plan in place. So this client was actually transporting about 50,000 liters of diesel fuel when it was involved in MVA, causing the truck and trailer to flip and slide off the road just outside of Hope, BC. So weeks prior to this incident actually occurring, QM Environmental was contracted to build a BC spill contingency plan. So in that plan, there was hazard assessments, spill response, planning maps, equipment, personnel, other resources identified, ICS structure and mutual aids in the industry, human health and safety guidelines, communications plan, waste management plan, wildlife plan, spill response procedures, and necessary training, all of which were supported during this operations. So a brief overview of what actually happened in this incident. So a truck and trailer combination was driving northbound on Highway 1 under very poor weather conditions, wet snow, patches of black ice. So the tanker truck collided with a passenger vehicle attempting to pass another automobile, which caused the truck to swerve, flip over, and slide off the road. As you see here, it kind of wedged itself between Highway 1 and adjacent CP rail tracks, which was a complete logistic nightmare dealing with highway closures and the railway lines. So QM subject matter expert myself was dispatched. Within 2 hours, I arrived on scene. My other crew, about 3 or 4 people, were 1 hour behind us with additional equipment and resources. So upon arrival to the scene, subject matter expert did a complete hazard and tank assessment, ensuring all life safety, public safety, and potential environmental concerns were addressed upon arriving. Upon completion of the initial site assessment, mitigation controls and containments were placed under the leaking tanks and downstream to prevent further contaminants migration. So when we arrived on scene here, there actually wasn't too much leaking. It was a slow leak from kind of every port, but it wasn't ripped open. It hadn't torn open yet. There was no immediate release. It was just slowly leaking over a couple hours. So initial site meetings and incident action plan were built with Ministry of Environment, Transport Canada, Fire Department, RCMP, the recovery company, a local road maintenance company. From there, I had to deal with CP Railway DGO maintenance officer who were contacted and brought into the meetings to make sure that we could limit the speed of the railway because we had staff working in hazardous atmosphere. As you can see, the truck was actively leaking diesel, and right behind that truck was a main railway line. So we actually got CP to limit the speed of the railway line, which is really nice for working there. So due to the tanker being upside down and compromised, this posed a lot of issues for us. We needed the tow truck company to stabilize the tanker prior to setting up for our next task, as when the product is transferred, we knew the weight distribution would cause the trailer to roll or change positions. And that would leave our staff in dangerous pinch points. Since the tanker was upside down and compromised, we knew the only option would be drill every compartment and transfer the remaining product into a receiving vessel. After getting the approval to start, doing one more safety meeting with all our staff on site and regulators, we had to start drilling. So due to the complexity and position of the damaged tanker, this took approximately 4 hours, and there were some problems with that, but we'll get into a little bit after. So after the product was transferred and all drills were plugged, patched, there was still a chance of residual product spilt out. The tanker recovery options were able to begin. So that part took about 4 hours. What you're seeing there is them actually pulling it from the ditch. That part again was about 4 hours, just due to the oncoming highway, dealing with the railway lines again. That took about 4 hours as well too. So the whole operations for us from start to finish was about 12 hours, from arrival to scene to transferring product to getting that truck hooked up by the recovery is about 12 hours. Approximately 95% of the product was recovered through some leaks throughout the transfer operation and stuff like that. We lost about 5%. So with this, there was actually a lot of issues at hand. So due to where we were in Hope in the middle of the night, we weren't able to get an LT licensed vacuum truck to help with operations at all. So we needed a Section 52 from BC Ministry of Environment who was on site the whole time. The cold weather kept freezing our airlines on our drilling operations, so we had to keep heating up that air compressor as well too. So this unfortunately was a fatality. So what you can see in the background there on Highway 1, we actually had coroners there for about 4 or 5 hours doing investigations. We had to have all the lights off at certain times while they took photos and stuff like that. But for the main part, it was an active investigation scene for most of our operations. We were getting lots of pressure from highway to open up because it was close about 12 to 14 hours before vehicles are allowed to go. We had some emergency vehicles go through because there was some emergency incidents that happened actually in the car lineup itself, but we're able to get them escorted through RCMP. Another hiccup in our plan was, so you can see the back end of the tanker there, all those welds were actually compromised without us knowing it. It was plugged in the clay dirt there, and there was a vacuum on the tanker. So once we started drilling into that back compartment, product spilling actually sped up quite significantly, which we kind of expected to happen, but we didn't know that the tear was that bad. There was some photos after where the tear was actually about an inch wide, and product still didn't get out due to the vacuum on the tanker. And last but not least, the biggest problem with this was the whole incident was actually filmed by the Highway Through Hell crew, which, nerve-wracking at times. Being filmed in an emergency event was never ideal for a lot of our staff, but it worked out good in the very end of it. We ended up airing on season 9, episode 6, so you can actually watch this entire recovery on season 9, episode 6 of Highway Through Hell. Other than keeping them out of the hot zone, the rest of it went pretty smooth. So once that recovery was done, we actually covered the entire site and made sure no contaminants were going to leave it. And the next steps were for us to build a remediation plan. So from there, QM planned to schedule remediation, working in conjunction with Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and BC Ministry of Environment. During our initial dig, we dug approximately 200 metric ton of impacted soil, and we stockpiled it on site. Soil characterization samples were taken for proper characterization of the waste, which reduced disposal costs significantly. We estimated about $50,000 to $100,000 in disposal saving just by taking the time to do soil characterizations and working with our client and regulators to find the cheapest option. Upon digging, we took some samples and we noticed some small exceedances in some areas. QM went back to dig out another 35 metric tons and load out all the stockpiles that were on site, which again, due to strategic planning, saved our client quite a bit of money. So diesel impacted soil in excess of the applicable standards still remain directly adjacent from highway, 3 to 4 meters in depth. So material couldn't be excavated without removing substantial portion of the highway. So to get actual all exceedances, we estimated we needed to remove 2 lanes of Highway 1, which we knew was never going to happen. So excavation was backfilled this time, graded, compacted, and the road right-of-way was reconstructed to MOTI specifications. So all this was done under guidance of a geotechnical engineer just to take the pressure off QM. So from there, QM completed a stage 1 preliminary site investigation to determine the likelihood that current or previous site activities may have contaminated the site prior to conducting any additional environmental investigations. Areas of potential environmental concerns and potential contaminants of concerns were identified. A phase 2 environmental site assessment was completed to investigate and delineate soil, groundwater, soil vapor impacts that remain beneath Highway 1. Soil impacts are delineated horizontally and vertically. Complete seasonal groundwater and soil vapor sampling expected by early 22. So we hope by, in the next 8 months that the site's completely wrapped up with all recovery done, and this site will be completely restored. So some cool takeaways for us. So we are noticing in this industry that pre-planning preparedness goes a long way. So it can significantly minimize the negative effects during any emergency. By having a response company writing and executing plans, it can speed up activation response during any incident. So by having us actually written this plan weeks prior, this was actually a pretty smooth transition to getting out to site and operating for our client. The communications was flawless. I mean, other than a few hiccups, the recovery itself went awesome. Another key takeaway for clients is ensuring all plans are tested. So we may write a plan, but without testing it, we know that there's some huge issues that may be identified, and it's better to identify that during an exercise than during a live event where you're kind of stuck. So one of the most positives here was there was a really good relationship with regulators, railways, and client ensured that there was a high level of trust in response. So we were actually on first name basis with every single regulator and road maintenance person and railway line on the site. So when we got to site, it was just a couple texts and phone calls. We actually had everybody who would need to be involved in ICS involved right away. So within 30 minutes of being on site, every major party and stakeholder was actually involved in our initial meeting, which sped up process because I've been on incidents where that takes 6 to 8 hours to get that ball rolling. It was very, very smooth. So that's it for this one. So next, it's a case study of a global pandemic, H1 in the workplace. So this is the cool case study with Suzanne Bernier, which is an honor for us to come work for QM and to write plans and speak of case studies like this. So all yours, Suzanne.
Thanks very much, Chase. And hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to tune in today for today's webinar. I'm going to share a bit of my experience on how we navigated through the last global pandemic, which some people may remember and others may not, because it was definitely not as severe as the one we're going through now. So on that note, we'll get right into it. First, a little bit more about me. I've been in the field of emergency management for over 20 years. I started off as a field officer for Emergency Management Ontario, did that for several years, and then I joined the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, was an emergency specialist for them, then came back to the province of Ontario to help in developing the government's first business continuity program. And further to that, once that happened, I then went over I was asked by the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board here in Ontario, WSIB, to create their first emergency management and business continuity program, which included the province of Ontario's first pandemic plan. I'll go into a lot more detail about that. Once we finished developing that plan, I was then commissioned and asked by the United Nations headquarters to exercise and test their current pandemic plan. So this was back in 2008. Then I came back after being at the UN to run their exercise, which took about 3 months total. Came back and then got headhunted by Toronto Hydro and then led their EM and business continuity program for the next few years. before I went off on my own and started my own consulting business in 2012 and also published my first book at the time. In my consulting, I was providing planning, exercise, training, and speaking services for companies and communities and governments across North America and globally. Some of the recent clients, just as an idea of the kinds of clients I've dealt with, is everything from universities, the University of Toronto, to financial institutions, to insurance institutions, to the PGA of Canada, municipalities associations, the Directors Guild of Canada, and many more. So now we'll get into the case study and the issue at hand. Some of you might recall, if you're in Ontario, that back in 2003, we experienced quite a big epidemic here in Toronto, in the Toronto area, SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. There are a lot of failures that happened then because it was the first time we dealt with anything of that magnitude. Afterwards, we at WSIB were asked to develop the best pandemic plan that we could in case a pandemic happened. We didn't want to meet the failures that were identified during the SARS epidemic. So because I was the emergency manager at the time at WSIB, I was the one tasked with helping to create their first plan. So we didn't only create a plan, but we also created plans and templates that could be used not only internally for us, but also delivered to all of the employers of Ontario so that they would be able to use those to be able to create their own plans and procedures so that they could respond to an outbreak or an epidemic or a pandemic. Less than 3 years later, we had no idea that we would have to pull out that pandemic plan because the 2009 H1N1 pandemic happened. There were numerous lessons learned that we incorporated into the following year's infectious disease action plan as well. I'll give you a little bit more detail on what we did on that prevention side in the next slide. And so on the prevention side, we decided and we knew that communications is key. So we wanted to make sure that we could give the right information to staff in the right places all the time. What we did was we recognized that washing your hands, as well as proper hygiene techniques, covering your cough, work as far as preventing the spread of influenza or any other kind of infectious disease. So we went ahead and created more posters and signage, put them up in all of the different areas within our offices across the province, and did that throughout the year as opposed to just during flu season, because we recognized it wasn't just flu that we might be dealing with in an epidemic form. And just to repeat to everybody, you should be repeating to all of your staff, reminding them, besides all of the other great things that we're implementing now, to keep in mind the best and the most basic way to help prevent the spread in our workplaces or at home is washing your hands and following those proper hygiene techniques. Now let's go to the next slide. Sorry about that. All right. So in the communicable disease policy we also produced, we made sure that, and you'll notice that it doesn't say pandemic policy, it says communicable disease policy. And that's on purpose because we recognized that it wouldn't just be in a pandemic that we might need to pull these out. It might be during a measles outbreak or like a localized outbreak or an epidemic or something. That's why we called it communicable disease. Some people call it infectious disease. And that's what I'd recommend is instead of stay away from pandemic, the word pandemic, and maybe make it more like a communicable disease or infectious disease plan and policy. And we had some examples of other kinds of infectious diseases that could be spread throughout the workplace, and we included those within that first initial plan that we developed as well. And on top of that, we listed all the responsibilities of employees on how to advise their manager, their doctors, our corporate health center, and preventing transmission overall. It also listed the responsibilities of our managers and the corporate health center once they would be advised of possible communicable disease cases within the workplace. And next, our HR issues. We recognized, again, this is before any pandemic happened, but we knew that there would be different HR issues that we should be dealing with before the pandemic happened. So we created a several infectious disease policies, including we revised our original policy on extended absences. We used to require that people needed a doctor's note after 3 days to come to work, but we recognized that during a pandemic situation, this would not be feasible. So we revised that. We also put together interim guidelines to deal with those who may have exhausted all of their sick time and their vacation days, but were still required to stay at home due to the illness. We also recognized the possibility of work refusals and worked with the union ahead of time to deal with some of the issues that we might face during a pandemic situation. Next, we considered sick time, vacation time, like I said, medical leave, doctor's notes, etc. We looked and revised all of our policies and procedures that were about the pandemic or infectious diseases throughout while we were going through it as well, instead of waiting till the end. We also looked at the issue of the safety of working from home. So was it a safe place where people were now being asked to work from their home instead, physically, as well as the ergonomics of setting up in a home office, as well as the mental health aspects of working alone and being isolated and only being able to talk to people through a computer. Also, the concept of work-life balance, we realized that during a pandemic situation, that's going to change, and we're going through this right now. We have to figure out the different work-life balance that makes sense now with the new normal that we're in. Employee assistance providers, most of us have EAPs that we can refer our staff to if they have any mental health problems or issues. However, during a pandemic, we also realized that everybody else was going to go to that same EAP provider. So we made arrangements with other alternative employee assistance providers so that in case we needed them and they're all full, we have other people that we can provide to our staff. We also looked at the matter of privacy, which is huge, of course, juggling privacy with the importance of telling people and sharing with people when outbreaks are happening. So that's a very dicey kind of situation that we wanted to talk about ahead of time and how we'd handle that. And then we also recognized, and we should all recognize now as well, and we're seeing it already in the US, but the potential for increased workplace violence incidents as this pandemic is going on further and as more and more people are being implicated and affected negatively. These workplace violence incidents are going to continue to happen. Is there someone on your staff that people can report their concerns to if they have, let's say, a staff member that is saying concerning things or acting in a different way? Is there someone they can talk to? Is it the right person that you have in that role? Because it's really important to have the right person, or else people are not going to feel like they want to share their circumstances with that person. So make sure that it's the right person. So let's get right into H1N1 in the workplace. And some of you might remember, some of you might not, but it was our last pandemic that we had in 2009. During that pandemic, we had some confirmed cases within the workplace and had to deal with it at WSIB. So immediately, we did a cleansing, thorough cleaning, enhanced cleaning of the work area, as well as all of the common areas on the floor that was effective. And everything received enhanced cleaning as soon as the cases were confirmed. We didn't give out names, again, for the privacy reason, but managers were advised that there were employees or an employee working in the area that could have been subjected to the virus. Our corporate health center kept in contact with both of those cases who were away while ill. One was in the hospital, another one was recuperating at home. We also introduced guidelines for managers on how to handle future internal cases while jointly protecting people's privacy, as well as health and safety issues for the whole organization. Next, we developed a Memorandum of Understanding, which if you have a union environment, I really would suggest that you do something like this, because you're talking about your employees and perhaps they're going to be doing different things or working out of different locations. So the things that you're deciding ahead of time that you're going to ask them to do or require them to do, they have to be in agreement. And the best way to have them on board, if you have a union, is to invite the union reps in on your negotiations. And when you're talking about what you're creating, have them involved. They'll bring in your staff concerns and you'll be able to deal with them hopefully before they ever became a concern externally once the program is in place. So there was a number of different issues and things that we had dealt with in the Memorandum of Understanding, which we'll go through in the next slide. I just list down some of the different items within the Memorandum of Understanding. So here we go with some of the topics that were included here. Everything from whether or not the office remains open, and when we decide that, to the use of personal protective equipment, to possible work refusal scenarios, compensating for lost time, and other issues like that people are going through right now with this pandemic. Next, the learnings and the outcomes. I'll give you just a little bit based on the situation of us dealing with how we responded to 2009 H1N1 and now with COVID-19, just some of the preliminary learnings that we're taking away. Tactical spacing, so the social distancing within your workplaces and making sure that your workstations are spaced away social distantly. That must continue for the near future. Again, the reminding everybody about the frequent hand washing with soap and warm water, hand sanitizer, and giving your staff hand sanitizer if there's no access to soap and warm water in areas. Keep in mind the supply chain disruptions. If you haven't had any yet, we've seen some already. There may be others throughout the rest of this pandemic. Then there may be other critical infrastructure disruptions as well, power outages and other things. So keep that in mind as well. Human behavior and ethics, and we're seeing already, of course, throughout this pandemic, human behavior. People who want to wear masks or don't feel that it's safe for them to or to come to work or not. And then the ethics issue where we're seeing in hospitals right now as well, where they're having to make the decision of whether some people can get fixed or others cannot. And some people are going to die from that. And so that's a huge issue that our hospitals and healthcare centers are going to have to deal with. Critical and essential workers, we all pretty much know what that is now because of this pandemic, but we identified them back then as well. We had enhanced cleaning procedures. Think about masks and whether or not you're going to implement mask wearing in your workplace when you're back to business. And how you're going to provide that. Are you going to provide masks for people? Or are you going to ask them to provide their own and come in with them? And temperature checks and self-assessment checks that we're doing right now in different places, does that make sense to continue to do that within your workplace or not? And these are all things that you should consider within your workplace, what makes sense based on what you already have and what the needs are. And invest. Let's take this opportunity. We're in this pandemic now, so let's make the best of it. We've identified now what some of our failures are and the different plans that need to be enhanced or developed. Let's start working on those now. Start working on our next exercises that we're going to be holding. I know we've just gone through the largest exercise we ever could deal with over the last year and a bit, but we also need to recognize there are other things that are going to happen. And we need to make sure that we're ready, even when it's during still the pandemic or after the pandemic's over. We have to recognize that we're still vulnerable to respond to different things. To provide training, Chase had mentioned that earlier, the necessity of training, and of course reinforcing that, exercising and training to make sure that your employees who are responsible for responding to an event know what they're supposed to do and know what their colleagues are supposed to do as well. In the end, increased communications as well, because we know that every time there's a real event or an exercise, communications comes up as one of the constant failures. Because of that, we want to make sure that you have a communications plan in place that can address those failures ahead of time so that they don't come into play. And now we are going to look at the case study takeaways. And I know you will all agree, that your employees are the backbone of your organization. So ensure that you have the proper plans and procedures and policies in place to support their health and well-being before, during, and after any emergency, including an infectious disease outbreak, epidemic, or pandemic. Consider training your non-essential staff to perform some of your critical functions, particularly if they have experience or training in the past. And as I mentioned before, involve your union if there is one, and keep your employees informed of your plans at all times. And now that brings us to our question and answer session. I will open it up now to anyone who has any questions for Chase or I. I'm not seeing any questions here yet. It's your last chance now. If anybody has any questions, you can type them in. We'll give people another couple of seconds, and if not, I'll turn it back over to Chase to end today's webinar.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, Suzanne. I don't see any questions coming through at this time either. So again, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I know you guys are all pretty busy, and taking up half an hour every day is not scheduled and normal, but we really appreciate it. A link of this recording will go to everybody who registered. Along with that, there'll be some data sheets from QM. Oh, there's a question. I got one. Sorry, guys. But health and safety procedures differ in a paint manufacturing company? No, I think honestly, any procedures we can make them customizable, right? And that's the thing is, whatever your hazards are, whatever your risks are, we customize those in your company. Whether it's paint, whether it's gasoline, whether it's ammonia or chlorine, whether it's transportation or fixed facility, you just make it customized to exactly what it is. You find the risks and you mitigate the risks, and you have that set plan for those. Good question. Cool. Again, so thank you all very much. There's our email there if you have any questions, concerns. Like I said, you'll get a recording of this webinar within the next day or two, along with some backup information on our slides and some data from Q Environmental. Thank you all very, very much for calling in today, and we look forward to talking to you all soon.